So I feel good about the dominant subtype covering that. Let's talk about the next one in line. So we've got dominant. Next is creative. So what does the creative expressed ESFJ look like?
This is a more exploratory and sociable style of ESFJ. And these ESFJs might actually think that they're perceivers. I could see them mistyping and believing that they're ESFPs after I read this description, or possibly even ENFPs. They're charming, attentive to others, adaptable, often diverse in their interests and skills. And their goal is, instead of leading others, it's to involve others and inspire them. And in Linda Barron's vernacular, they have a get things going style. The dominant ESFJ is more of in charge. This creative is a more get things going, being a catalyst. They have a strong what's called starburst pattern in their EEG scans. And if you've heard us talk about the starburst pattern before, it's basically almost like it's a simulation of a brainstorm. It's taking in a piece of information and connecting it with a whole bunch of other pieces of information. And it almost always shows up the strongest when a person is in a brainstorming session. And dominant ESFJs, it's not noteworthy that they have this, but creative ESFJs, it is. They have a very strong starburst pattern. And that means that they can take in a whole bunch of stuff, or they take in one thing and then see a bunch of different connections around it. And they're not necessarily as put off by new ideas. They are more responsive and adaptive to new concepts. They are also very observant, and they immediately put side by side this new idea they just heard with everything that they've ever seen before, and then they try to kind of understand what it could mean. They're a lot more open to the idea of brainstorms and what I think a person could call sort of unstructured creativity. They're also distractible, and that's the cost-benefit analysis, right? They're more open, they are more creative, and they're also way more distractible.
Squirrel.
Exactly.
Like new shiny objects come in, and then their attention's drawn over there.
You got it. So they fill their days with pleasant, interesting diversions, right? And usually that's a good conversation with an interesting person, but it means that they're not going to be as on top of things as maybe a dominant ESFJ would. They're not as targeted, focused. They're a little bit more open and a little bit more all over the place, which is one of the reasons why they might mistype themselves as ESFPs or ENFPs, since that's the stereotype for those types. Yeah. But they're still pretty good at setting goals, and they're pretty good at following through on plans. And so they may have this distractible quality, but they're judgers all the same. And so if they do have a plan, they can stick to their plan. And they are people who have varied interests. So in their job, in their career path, you might see a whole bunch of different things they've done, or they might be doing a whole bunch of different things in a single job or career. They also really like travel. They like exploring cultural and historical sites. They really enjoy people coming along with them on the ride and sharing all these experiences together. They like being in the limelight, so they enjoy performing on stage. And they tend to be just sort of this flurry of energetic activity. They're very interesting to other people as a general rule. But they can also be a little careless, right? That's the distractibility thing. They might not be as on top of things, and they might be a little careless in some of their behaviors. And the biggest downside is that they can create a flurry of surprise drama around them. Not even sure how they got into this drama.
I imagine this subtype is the ESFJ that has a lot of relationship cul-de-sacs, I'll call it. Like relationships that were kind of building towards something, but then something else came along. And so it's not a severing of a relationship. I wouldn't even say the word abandonment is appropriate, but just a diffusion of the energy. And so sometimes there's a lot of, I would assume that the creative ESFJ has unfinished relationship business behind them, like with other people throughout their life, just because people are so important to ESFJ. It's not about projects as much as new people coming into life. So a lot of relationships to manage and to handle can get overwhelming, even for someone that's wired for that much relationship management.
Well, they're also wired or have trained themselves to get in relationships in kind of an open-ended supportive way.
Yeah.
And so that open-endedness, like you said, might create a lot of those cul-de-sacs. They might have a lot of plate spinning, actually.
Yeah.
And their goal is to be supportive, but sometimes I could see that also getting a little overwhelming and having a hard time keeping up with everybody.
Yeah, and seeing all the possibility and potential of every possible relationship that I can start up. Look at what could happen. Look at the potentiality there. You're creative, and you're not thinking about all the work that's required. All this, it's just all the possibilities, and so you keep creating this dynamic. A lot of creative subtypes, from a career standpoint, I think benefit from this idea of platform thinking. So a great example of a platform is like if you might be watching this podcast on YouTube. YouTube is a platform. It enables us as literal creators, podcast creators, to create something and then distribute it on a platform and have an audience for it. Creative subtypes, no matter if it's ESFJ or another type, often benefit from these types of tools, these types of platforms. It may not be YouTube as a platform, it might be Uber as a platform to be a driver, or something else, Etsy, where to sell your crafts or your creations. So creative subtypes, if this is how you identify as an ESFJ, start to think in terms of what platforms can I associate with to both support me. I'm used to supporting other people all the time, but I need to be supported. And also a platform can help create a container. You're on YouTube. Well, now that the container means you're probably going to be creating video, not audio, because you're on YouTube. It creates that container. So it helps you focus, and it also supports you. And I think this can be very beneficial for creative ESFJs to connect themselves to that platform and then use that as their catalyst for doing great, expressive work in the world.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And especially since this is a type, creative subtypes tend to be the ones that have the biggest struggle with self-discipline.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's because they have that more fun, casual, sort of get things going style. And even if, like in this case, they are judgers, so they can create a plan and stick to the plan, there's still a desire to keep things open and fun and interesting. They're chasing dopamine, right? Like you mentioned, the neurotransmitter of dopamine. Oh, we haven't mentioned that yet. I guess
No, you jumped the gun. But that's
jumped the gun.
The neurotransmitter is dopamine. That's
right.
The choice for all creative subtypes, creative ESFJs. And that makes sense, right? That a creative subtype would chase dopamine neurotransmitter.
Exactly.
And they tend to seek other people that seek the same.
Exactly. And so because of that, things like platforms and support structures from others and maybe people who are a little bit will help them find the more grounded half of themselves might be really good for people of this style. Now, speaking of groundedness, there is one note about, and this might be why this subtype has a tendency to mistype, possibly as ESFPs, is that they have very strong body-based awareness. And Dara mentions that means they learn and repeat procedures, routines, and steps, meaning that they can figure out any skill that just requires some repetition, or they can just dance the night away with energy and style.
Yeah.
And so, again, this might be a type that mistypes as ESFP, but actually is just simply the creative ESFJ.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the careers that these dopamine-chasing creative ESFJs might find themselves in.
Okay, so again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are the kinds of careers that might attract a creative ESFJ, or if you want to become more creative as an ESFJ, these are the kinds of careers that might bring this part of you out. Event coordinator, television or radio presenter, retail manager, publicist, talent agent, travel agent or tour guide, wedding planner, art or music therapist, personal stylist or fashion consultant, social media manager, customer relations specialist, interior designer, museum or gallery curator, recreation coordinator, and food and beverage manager.
Man, so many of those are facilitating people having amazing experiences, creating a creative environment or circumstance to not just get needs met, but get experiences had, like to have a moment with something. And I think that's a really cool list and if you identify with one of those and are more the creative style, maybe you're in a career like that. Or if you want to, again, like Antonia said, lean more into your creative subtype, you might want to pick something that's in alignment with one of those careers that can help shape you and wire you that way. So let's talk a little bit about one layer deeper. We talked about the dominant driver function of extroverted feeling harmony, the co-pilot or auxiliary function of introverted sensing or memory. The dominant, both of these cognitive functions, both the decision-making and the learning style, are analytically focused.
If you're a dominant subtype, right?
Intentionality. Now the creative, it's different. Not both are not analytic.
No. So in the case of the creative subtype, the perceiving function of introverted sensing or memory, that stays analytic. But the judging function, decision making, as you mentioned it before, extroverted feeling or harmony, that becomes holistic. That's more open framed. And that makes sense that there would be less certainty around the judgment of how things should happen, right? There'd be a little bit more openness in that for a creative subtype.
But there's a lot of analytic energy on the perception, like how I want to perceive the quirkiness, the creativity, the perception. I'm on a hunt for something creative in my life if I'm a creative ESFJ.